Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'd like to talk about rock and roll star Tom Petty, who just passed away on October 2nd, 2017 from cardiac arrest. Tom Petty was 66 years old. And I have to say, he was one of my favorite all-time rock and roll artists. But Tom Petty, even though he had such fabulous, great success with his songwriting and his performing, his life was very, very difficult. And it is known that Tom Petty had problems expressing himself with words, but not with song. The way that he expressed himself emotionally was through his music and through the words in his songs. Tom Petty was born in Florida, Gainesville, and growing up as a child, he experienced extreme physical and verbal abuse from his father. His father was known to beat him to a pulp with whelps all over his body as far back as he can remember, by 5 years old. 5 years old. And so this made Tom pretty much withdraw, even though he was very close to his mother. And his mother was always like in between him and his father. But because of so much abuse, Tom dropped out of high school to pursue his career as a rock and roll artist. But when he thinks back to his childhood memories, he remembers his dad was not happy with him being an artist because he was interested in music, art, clothes. Whereas his dad wanted him to be a strong boy who participated in sports. Tom was not interested in sports. And he said that he always knew that his parents were secretly afraid that he was gay. But Tom loved the girls, and as he escaped from his family, he left with his girlfriend, and they went to California. This was the place of his dreams, because Tom said that the only place as a child that he could escape was through watching television. So Hollywood in Los Angeles was the place that he was going to go. And so that's where he ended up. But let me give you some of the greats that Tom Petty performed with. He was a genius. And I have to say, some of his songs I will listen to for the rest of my life. They always bring back great, great memories. But looking at him, he performed with one of his great friends was Stevie Nicks, Eric Clapton, George Harrison, Johnny Cash. Bob Dylan was one of his great friends that he toured with, and Roy Orbison, as well as Jeff Lynne. But one of the greatest musicians that he teamed up with, being George Harrison, he and some of the greats formed an amazing group in around the year of 1988 called the Traveling Wilburys. And who was in this group but George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne. These are like my all-time favorites. I gotta tell you, this was just a match made in heaven. And they had performances and albums that achieved the greatest awards. And of course, Tom Petty achieved the greatest awards in rock and roll and fame and history. But going over his life, which wasn't all that easy, one thing I can say about him is he was close to his mother. But when his mother lay dying in bed in the hospital, he went for the last time to see her, which she couldn't even talk. But as he left, sad and depressed, he noted the elevator ride going down with his father, which he'll never forget. His dad actually had the audacity to hit him up for money after the way that he treated him throughout his childhood. But even after his mother passed, Tom said that she visited him regularly, vividly through his dreams, waking him up in hotel after hotel. We're going to see in his astrological chart the references to this. But going forward, as he got married, he had 2 daughters. His wife became very possessive because when you're a rock and roll star, it's not the greatest thing for marriage because you're always on the road. But his wife, his girls, who he was extremely close to, his wife and his 2 girls, who he loved dearly, she was said to have issues because she constantly tried to control him through attempting or threatening suicide every time he had to go on the road. So she was extremely abusive to him, very mean. And what happened was he finally had to divorce her. But the guilt of leaving his girls and ending his marriage haunted him for the rest of his life, because even after his divorce, there was a time when he went on to a new life. But before he ended his marriage, he was to go on tour with Bob Dylan. He almost canceled it because of his issues with his wife and girls. But Stevie Nicks is the one that convinced him to carry on, to go on, which he did, and they had a great time. It was an extremely successful tour with Bob Dylan and Stevie Nicks joining them on stage quite often. But when he returned, he did end his marriage, and this started a deep depression. And it wasn't until years later that he finally found what he called the love of his life, Dana York, which she stayed by his side as he struggled with addiction, and he became addicted to heroin. But after all of that, his wife, that he came together with years later, she helped him. And she helped him and stuck with him, and he overcame his heroin addiction till the end of his life. So I would have to say that Tom Petty, to overcome a serious addiction, because first of all, this was fueled by his childhood abuse and his deep emotions. Tom Petty was deeply, deeply emotional. He said that when he had his feelings hurt, it was excruciating. And we're going to see all of who he is through his astrological birth chart. But I will say this, overcoming an addiction is probably the hardest thing to do in this world. And he did it, overcoming. And I believe this gives mountains of enlightenment and accomplishment. Probably he achieved so much in the materialistic world with his talent, but spiritually he overcame great obstacles through overcoming a serious addiction and all the emotions of abuse from childhood. So now let's look at the chart of Tom Petty as we go through his life, understanding his horoscope. So looking at Tom Petty, looking at his chart, he was born October 20th, 1950. And the time that we have is 5 p.m. in Gainesville, Florida. Tom Petty has a Pisces ascendant. And with Pisces ascendant, Jupiter is the ruler of his chart. So wherever the ruler of the chart goes, whatever house, is the most significant house of events and experiences throughout life. So looking at his chart, he has Jupiter conjunct his moon in Aquarius in the 12th house. Now remember, the 12th house is the house of the past. It's the house of emotions. It is the house of spiritual liberation from this world, which I think he did accomplish with greatness, overcoming these addictions. But thinking about the Jupiter-Moon conjunction in his 12th house, this represented the moon, meaning the mother, the closeness that he did have with this mother. And when Tom would really feel hurt, he would go into himself, feeling like he had to get away from the world. These feelings of loss, he would retrieve into his own world. That's what the 12th house is. Being alone, being isolated. And of course, when you're alone and isolated, you can truly reflect on your feelings and go deep within the core of understanding or your feelings. Because remember, the moon in a chart does represent the emotions and feelings, which he had big emotional feelings being conjunct Jupiter, but in the 12th house, he had to retreat because he had such deep feelings with Jupiter, with the moon. But with it being in Aquarius, it's really that he tried to detach from his feelings, but he couldn't. But you can also see with the 12th house representing the spirit world, beyond this world, dreams. The 12th house deals with our dreams, our intuition. And with the moon representing the mother, this can indicate the fact that he stated his mother haunted him through his dreams repeatedly, always trying to connect with him. This is a psychic experience of the other side. This is what he experienced with his mother. So when we look at Tom's chart and we see his sun is debilitated in Libra, in the 8th house, the sun represents the father. The 8th house is the house of disgrace and humiliation. So you can see the aspects of disgrace and humiliation through the abusive acts, the way his father treated him. And because this is his chart, the sun being debilitated, this definitely hurt his sense of self and who he is. So the sun being debilitated, if you take it a step further and you look at the sun being in Libra, Libra is ruled by Venus. When you look to Venus as the dispositor of the sun, even Venus is debilitated by being in the sign of Virgo. So it's doubly difficult. It's doubly debilitated. And this can represent the issues and problems that he had through the abuse of his father with the 8th house. But going to his 9th house, Mars. Remember, the 9th house is the house of the father in Vedic astrology. And with Mars being there, his father was very angry. Mars represents anger and attacks, which his father did hit him and attack him. But it also represents so much anger that his father put out onto Tom. Now, furthermore, to see the disruption of his childhood concerning his father and the effects on his mother, notice his 4th house, where we have planet Uranus, which is the planet of sudden, unexpected upheavals, which he had to leave home at such an early age because He couldn't take the unpredictable events and problems that were going on in his home and family. But notice when you start to look at the astrological aspects, both Saturn and Mars aspect his 4th house. Mars' full aspect is 8 placements from itself. So Mars' 8th aspect, Mars is aspecting the 4th house, and Saturn's full aspect is 10 houses from itself. So we have both malefic Mars and Saturn aspecting the 4th house of home, family, and the mother. Furthermore, notice that Mars, by its 4th full aspect, Mars' full aspects is 4 and 8, special aspects, it's aspecting the moon, which is another indication for the mother. So his mother lived a very difficult life dealing with his father, dealing with her husband. But the effects that Jupiter does aspect the 4th house as well is that there was a coming together between Tom and his mother. And this is also seen through the fact that Jupiter conjuncts the moon that represents his mother. So you can see why the family and the discord about his parents, they're definitely here. But he has got a stellium of planets in his 7th house representing the difficulties and trials and tribulations through relationships. Looking at his 7th house, you'll see Saturn, K2, Mercury, Venus, and Neptune. Stellium means 3 or more planets in a house, which he had, including the outer planets in K2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's tough. There are some great planets here and some extremely difficult planets here in his 7th house. So the first 2 planets together that I have to make note of is Saturn with K2. K2 is difficult, so is Saturn, especially for Pisces ascendant. Saturn is the ruler of the 12th, representing great losses through relationships. And on top of that, K2 is an indicator of loss. But when we have K2 in the 7th house, remember wherever K2 is, and K2 is the south node of the moon, by the way, it represents, there's a sense of something's always missing, something's incomplete. There's a void, there's an emptiness, there's a drain. And this was his relationships. So Saturn K2 was great losses, plus an emptiness that he felt. He couldn't get it to work. But notice we also have Mercury, Venus here, and Neptune, I might add. Mercury is very tight with Neptune. And Neptune is not only spirituality, it can deal with misunderstandings and deception, which I think can deal specifically with the problems he had in his marriage and relationships. But let's think a minute about Neptune K2. This can deal with denial, deception in relationships, discord. And I also find that when you find especially both K2 and Neptune in a house, there's going to be great problems. I find with K2 in the 7th house, many times the spouse can be like a victim. They have emotional problems. They need to feel healed and supported. And Tom ultimately felt like he was responsible, Saturn, to his wife to heal and make her better. But he couldn't. and this haunted him. This is what his emotional discord in the second part of his life dealt with. First, it was the abuse of his father, then it was the abuse of a wife. And this was emotionally debilitating for him. But notice Mercury being in Virgo. Mercury is exalted, its highest place of exaltation in this sign. And it's in the 7th house, which is an angle. This represents a Bhadra yoga. This is one of the Mahapurusha yogas, the great yogas of men or mankind. When a planet is exalted or in its own sign of rulership in an angle, this means that this planet Mercury is so powerful and reflects who he is. This indicates his great writing ability, his incredible talent with music. And Neptune represents music many times. So he was a creative genius with Mercury exalted conjunct Neptune. And Venus being in the sign of Virgo, debilitated, is uplifted by exalted Mercury. But a debilitated Venus many times can be another indication of problems in relationships, especially in a man's chart, because Venus indicates the wife and it's debilitated. But with Mercury, the energy changes, as Tom did come into a very good marriage in the second part of his life with his second wife. Realize that Rahu is in the 1st house, close to the ascendant, and this can represent his fame and fortune. Rising to be a rock and roll star, mega rock star, world famous, and will never be forgotten. This is his heritage. This is Rahu in the 1st, his destiny to be famous. And tied up with the opposition to all those planets in the 7th house. And when you have many planets opposed Rahu, there are more problems in relationships. You will see this. So, glancing over at his Navamsha chart, we see many planets in the 4th house. Notice in his Navamsha, he has Mars, Saturn, Ketu, Pluto, and Uranus all in the 4th house. So this represents the second part of life and understanding that he had so much trouble with his family, either his family of origin and his family with his wife and 2 girls. It is heartbreaking, and it almost makes me understand why the name of his group was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It wasn't that he was breaking hearts so much, but that his heart was broken because he had so many problems and issues around family and wanting to find peace and the responsibility to make his family work, which he struggled with, and it broke his heart. His feelings were hurt to the point where the only thing that made him feel better about the pain of this broken responsibility and emotions was drugs, and heroin, he said, was the only thing that stopped the pain. So the 4th house, meaning the house of happiness, you can see where there was the sadness and the brokenheartedness. So he began his Jupiter Mahadasha when he was around 17 years old. And this was the breakaway period where he began his own rock and roll groups and he left home. But he embarked on his career, his creative talents. Jupiter was a great dasha, but it's still that planet that's in the 12th house. So he was still dealing with his emotions. And I believe the music was his outlet in healing emotionally for him. So he was in his Jupiter Mahadasha till he was 33 years old. So he experienced a great rise in fame throughout this dasha. And I believe because Jupiter is aspecting his sun tightly, very tightly, trining his sun, this was the opportunity to have the confidence he needed and the opportunity to be the creative artist that he is. And noticing that in his Navamsha chart, Jupiter is very powerful in the first house. As well as notice Jupiter does rule the 10th house, representing his career. But as he entered into his Saturn Mahadasha between age 33 and 52 years old, this was the greatest rise. This was where he rose to stardom of his greatest accomplishments in life. But noticing Saturn in the 7th house with Ketu was the hardest period for him emotionally, dealing with losses around relationships. So this was the time that he struggled the very, very most with his relationships. Also, consider the fact that he rose to stardom during this, but he was also dealing with his addictions during this Saturn Dasha. It was by age 52 that he entered into his Mercury Mahadasha. And remember, his Mercury is that all-powerful planet, being in Virgo. It's exalted. It's in an angle. This is a point of power. So some of his greatest accomplishments and feelings of accomplishment came through this Mercury Mahadasha, overcoming addictions and problems and coming into a healing relationship that helped him, as his second wife helped him overcome his addictions and stay on course. Tom Petty passed when he was in the last cycle of his Mercury Dasha, Mercury Saturn, the ending bhukti phase of Mercury. And I often say that when people pass, that they are generally going to be in a dasha of a Marika planet. A Marika planet is a planet that either rules or is in the Marika houses, which the Marika houses are 2 and 7. So the planets that rule houses 2 or 7, or planets within houses 2 or 7. And Mercury, the bhukti ruler of this time, rules the 7th house, is in the 7th house, and is conjunct Saturn, the Mahadasha ruling planet, which is also in the 7th house, which are both Marikas. So this can indicate death, because Marikas are the indicators of death. They're called the killers. But what I find that within this cycle, he really came into his own with feeling a sense of accomplishment, expressing deep emotional feelings. I feel that Tom Petty had a yearning to express the feelings of the heart, and this is relevant and obvious in his music. But also on the day that he died, I think it's very, very significant that Jupiter was transiting Jupiter in the sky, was exactly conjunct his sun in the 8th house. And I feel that because Jupiter is on his sun, that his death was a beautiful experience for him. He was released, and he was released at the time that he accomplished his spiritual mission on earth to heal the relationships, heal the karmas of the soul, to heal his hurt feelings from the past. Remember, the houses 4, 8, and 12 are called the moksha houses. This is spiritual liberation from the world. And as Jupiter hit his sun, his spirit, his body, it also cast a perfect trine to his moon and natal Jupiter. Jupiter was exactly trining his natal Jupiter, 4 degrees. And I have to say, with Jupiter aspecting natal Jupiter in the 12th house of spiritual liberation, end of life, going on to the next world, healing, forgiveness, I'm sure that he reconnected with his mother, as it aspects Jupiter and the moon in the 12th house, and even a healing and connection to his father, as the sun represents the father. So this was a life well lived. This was a life where all the successes that the world can give, fame, fortune, feeling connected, he achieved. And he was able to move on to the higher realms with joy and happiness because he accomplished his goal of healing the emotional issues. He put that out there in his songs. His songs are full of emotion, full of feeling and healing. I want to say that Tom Petty accomplished a great goal spiritually to overcome and heal the dark issues from the past. And addiction. Addiction is one of the hardest things to overcome in a lifetime, and he accomplished it. So mission accomplished. And I have to say, Tom Petty gave back to the world through his music, through his feeling, and has given so much joy back to the world through his music. I have to say, his music will live on in my life and in my heart, and it's given me great joy and happiness, as it has to so many other people that he has entertained. But listen to the message in his music. It's deep, it's profound, it's feeling. And Tom Petty has achieved one of the greatest goals of healing karmas from the past through the healing of addiction and through healing of the emotion, moving on to the next realm, eliminating the karmas. So I want to close by saying how appreciative and grateful and thankful I am that this being came here and graced the earth with his talents. And I'm so happy to see through his chart that the spiritual enlightenment was achieved. So with that, I'd like to close. And if you would like to know more about my work or like a reading, you can always go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Or if you would like a transcript of this reading on Tom Petty, you can find it in my magazine, astrologicmagazine.com. And if you're interested in learning Vedic astrology, I have a university. Go to my university, which is University of Vedic Astrology.com. Thank you.